that we use come from. There we go. Can you see that? So we have, the ochre colors a lot of times have come from Italy and France. Sienna comes from Italy. Burnt sienna is just a sienna that's been heated up and turned into a pigment. Sepia, actually, interestingly, comes from cuttlefish. The way they used to produce sepia was they'd catch cuttlefish, and the glands that produce the ink, they would dry it out and then crush it and make sepia. Now they do it synthetically. Almost all the paints now are made synthetically. An interesting one, mummy brown. If you can see, I'm pointing at Egypt here. If you can see this map, mummy brown. Who knows what mummy brown is? You know, right? You know what it is. I've even tried to see if I can buy some of this, and it is ground up mummies. They made it from, they had a lot of mummies from Egypt and animal mummies and people mummies. They made paint out of these things, and it makes a, if you look it up online, you'll see a beautiful purplish gray color that they made from mummies, but I can't imagine. They still do that? No, I'm sure it'd be illegal now. I'm sure it'd be antiquities and all this preservation of mummies and things, but I don't think I'd want it in my house anyway, would you? I read a story about a guy that had a tube of this stuff back, I think in the 1800s is when they were doing this, and he found out what it was. He actually gave it a proper burial. Took it out and gave it a burial, buried his paint. Huh? Yeah, you would too. Yeah, yeah, right. Another one that's interesting, India yellow came from India, and what the story behind that is, what they did there was they had cows that they fed on a steady diet of mango leaves, nothing but mango leaves. And then they collected their urine, and their urine was a bright, very bright yellow. When they got it crystallized, then they could grind it up and make a bright yellow paint out of it. A lot of interesting stories. Yeah, you wouldn't think you'd want to use that either, but
who thinks of these things?
I don't know how they ever come up with this.
A lot of artists, they tend to be a little bit crazy.
Yeah, look at Van Gogh. Who knows what he did? Right. Well, you know Dyer's wood. You know what Dyer's wood is, the weed that we have here. And you can make a blue out of Dyer's wood.
It's a yellow flower, but use a
Yeah.
fabric.
Yeah, people do that.
Well, there's kind of a whole process to doing this.
Traditionally, you probably know more about it than I do. I've read that traditionally they used to soak that in urine too, to extract the pigment. I don't know what they do now. Ammonia now would be certainly be more sanitary, wouldn't it? So, let's see. What are some other examples on here? Terre Verte. Do you use that color? Anybody? Terreverte. It's kind of a green. It's one of the very few pigments that's still, I have some, I'll pass it around, that's still made from these earths. Winsor Newton, anyway, I think is one of the very few that I could find that's still made using soil. And most of them are now made, almost all of these things are made synthetically nowadays. Some others, in Utah, we can find azurite. I'll hold this up here again so you can see it over here. Azurite and malachite. They're blue and green colors. And if you go down to the La Salle Mountains down by Moab, there are areas where they mine these colors. The azurite's a blue crystal, and malachite is a green. It's used in biological stains too. But they're found around copper deposits, wherever copper is.
You can find them out in
West Desert? Okay, you find both those out there? They're not uncommon. I've found them a time or two. There are other things I could go on and on. I got real interested in reading. Carmine is one that's made from insects. We still use it to this day in candy and soft drinks and things. It's a red color made from insects that feed on cactus. And they're produced commercially in Mexico and parts of Central America. So, we have lots of different ways that people have made colors, lots of different pigments that they've used. Shells can be used to make white. Chalk can be used to make watercolors. Of course, don't need white, but you can make a white from something like this, a black from charcoal, or if you use bone black or ivory black, I've got some ivory black here from Winsor and Newton. That's made by burning bones. And ivory black was originally made by burning ivory. Of course, now it's illegal to trade in ivory, but when people carved ivory in the past, they had all the shavings, and they would burn them, and that's how they produced ivory black originally. Nowadays, it's made from bones of cattle and other, things. I'll throw some of that out here too and just pass it around, and you can look at it. So those are the only two that I've been able to find that are still produced using these natural pigments. Everything else nowadays is synthetic, but it's still fun, I think, to look at these things and try to figure it out. And so I first got interested in this watching this movie, and then why would you do it? One of the things that I found is when I'm driving around, I'm looking, not only am I looking for things to paint, I'm looking at the hillsides for colors that I can collect. It adds kind of a fun dimension to the outing to do that, and you can end up with some colors. I'll show you some here in a minute. Some paints that nobody else has. They're pigments that you can't buy and that nobody else has, and so you've got something unique to paint with. So the process. Let me run you through the process of how to do this. I've got all kinds of stuff here. Typical me fashion. I'll be kind of disorganized here, but so let me go through this first. What I have here is kind of a schematic that shows what goes into a watercolor paint. And the pigment is what we've been talking about. A pigment would be maybe 10 to 20% only of what goes into the paint. The rest of this stuff that goes into it's called the vehicle. And the vehicle is composed of honey, gum arabic, there's a plasticizer in there, and a bunch of other things that make up the paint. These things are still used today. So we have the pigment that we can put into it. Then gum arabic, I bought this through Blick, and what gum arabic is a binder that sticks it to the paper and helps to distribute the pigment a little bit. It's a very sticky kind of a substance. What it is comes from a sap that grows on trees in Africa. And they collect these little sap droplets. It's kind of like pine pitch or something like that. Or if you know what frankincense is, that's another thing that comes in. Stinks. I don't know why frankincense. If you've ever smelled frankincense in a church, it just stinks. I don't know why they think it's a fragrance, but it's a similar kind of thing where it's a sap that's collected as a crystal from trees and then ground up into a powder. It's dissolved very slowly in water. When I made it, I made a double boiler and heated it up. It took quite a while, like when you make jam, you've got from the apple, the pectin is sometimes really hard to dissolve in water. This is similar. It's hard to dissolve in water. That's one component. Honey acts as a humectant. So what it does when you mix it in is it allows, it retains water and it allows the paint to rehydrate when you want to stir it up and start painting with it after it's hardened. When Tom Howard was here, I was interested in during his workshop, he talked about adding, I think he said 20% honey he mixes into his paint. And it makes sense because it's a component of watercolor paint. Nowadays there are some synthetic things that people can add as well. Same with gum arabic, they can use other things now too. let's see, the other things that go into it, you can put brighteners in. A brightener, I'm going to hold this up here so you can read it, is something like titanium oxide. It's something that would reflect the light that tends to brighten the paint a little bit. That's optional. What's that?
Does it make it opaque then?
If you put too much in, it makes it opaque. Yeah, like titanium white, Chinese white, is made with titanium oxide. You can use glycerin, which is a plasticizer. I've got a little bottle of glycerin here. You can find this almost anywhere. My wife swiped it. She works in a lab where she could get it and swipe just a little bit for me. And what that does is it makes it more flexible so it doesn't get brittle. So you mix all these things in. Again, I've mentioned the honey is humectant. And then in some cases, people will add an extender. That's usually a starch, like dextrin, that goes into it. And the purpose of that is to create a texture of the paint that is more, that is easier to brush. It's also used in student grade paints to make them cheaper. Because some of these pigments are expensive. And so if you buy a student grade paint versus a professional paint, it's going to have a lot of dextrin in it just to extend the pigment a little bit. Dispersant would be something like oxgall. What that does is help the paint to spread out. So all these things can be mixed into the paint. Yeah.
Say that last one again.
Oxgall. Yeah. Two L's. Oxgall. Right. Like that. And you can buy that like through Blick, or I think you can even get it down at Hobby Lobby. And that's actually, I think, still extracted from, is it the spleen or something like the gallbladder of animals. Depends on how you feel about that, whether you want to use that or not.
I'm sorry. Have you said what it does?
Yeah, what it does is it helps the paint to disperse.
Oh, disperse. Thank you.
Yeah, so it helps it to spread out. So all this stuff can go in to making the paint. And if you're interested, again, I'll hold this up here. I can give this to you if you want it. But this is a kind of just a recipe of how to make the vehicle. And I've got a little bottle of the vehicle here that I'll use when I start grinding the paint that I've mixed up with all these different components. And so the gum arabic, again, is dissolved in water. And simple recipes is a tablespoon, 1 part to 2 parts water, about a tablespoon of gum arabic in the vehicle. Then glycerin, again, is a plasticizer. Tablespoon of honey. You can add corn syrup to it as well to give it the ability to hold water and to rehydrate when you want to paint with it. And then oxgall. Clove oil is put in. I used it as it's an essential oil, and I used it as a preservative so that you don't get mold growing on your paint. And so I just went down to, and I think I brought it with me. Oh, here it is. Just went down to Natural Grocers and got some clove oil, and you put in 1 or 2 drops of clove oil to help preserve it. And then the pigment. I'm sorry? They smell good. It smells like Christmas cookies. Let me pass one around. It smells just wonderful. It smells strong, but I could sniff it all day. Yeah. No, it's I just pass it on down that way, and normal watercolors don't smell like that. Don't have that nice, wonderful odor to it. So that's basically what you use to mix the pigment in. So let's see. And again, I don't know quite how long to take on this, but let me go through and.
Brad, how do you test like the light classes or any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, what I did, one of the, I don't know how they do it professionally, but what I did, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I may as well do this. I decided to do it this way. And so these are some of the paints that I've made. And so what I did is I made a little flap, and I hung it in a window. This thing has been hanging in a window, south-facing window, for about 3 months now. And to see if it faded, and these.
So they're pretty light fast then?
Oh, these are light fast, but they were made from these soils. You know, if you made it from Dyer's woad or something, I bet it did fade. I'm sure it did fade. I don't know. But yeah, these are light fast as heck. Because it's been sitting in the sun for 3 months. So that's how I did it. But how the professional people do, I don't know how they do it. They have their way of rating it and doing it. That's how I did it. So the process, let me run you through the process, and I don't know if I'm going too fast or too slow. Just slow me down if I'm going too fast. I'm going to put this on paper so I don't make a mess in here. But the process basically is start out, gather the soil, and then I don't think I'll do this in here, but sieve it, run it through a sieve so that you remove the rocks and the pebbles and twigs and other things that are in there. Once you get to that stage, then it's a question of washing it. And how do you wash dirt? I mean, you don't. Yeah, exactly, right. So it's just a question of, I'll put some of this in here and do it. And it's just a question of rinsing it out. And this stuff doesn't really need to be washed. But if you got this in a river bottom or someplace like that, you'd want to wash out the roots and the other organic stuff that's in there. Then let it set, and of course this isn't going to settle very quickly. I don't want to take all night. But you can kind of pour it off like that. And just keep doing it. Keep the mud, in the bottom, keep stirring it up, and then finally, once it's been washed a few times, here's one that I washed and I just let it dry, and you can see that it's kind of caked. Can you see that? Kind of just like mud at the bottom of a mud puddle when it dries out. Just kind of cakes in the bottom of the thing. Once that's done, so you've filtered out all, sieved out all the rocks, the pebbles, things like that. Washed it if you need to. And then the next step is to grind it using a mortar and pestle. And I've kind of pre-done some of this to not make this take forever. But this does take quite a bit of time. I'm just going to do a little bit of it. So the mortar and pestle, of course, we use sometimes to make grind spices if you're into cooking. My wife does it a lot at home for cooking. But this isn't hers. She'd kill me if I use it for dirt. And it's just a question of grinding it and working it down into as fine a powder as you can possibly get it into. And this is a really easy one to do. Some of these others, I think this one is going to be hard to do. And I'm sure if you were trying to make something out of a shell or out of bone, it'd take a lot more effort to do. And when I've done this for quite a long period of time. I might spend 15 or 20 minutes just really trying to grind this stuff up. And this is after it's been washed and after the sticks and other things have been taken out of it. So I might have had some that was pre-ground, and I think I'm going to use it because that's pretty coarse still. So the next step is mulling it. And the purpose of mulling it is to make a very, very fine paste, that it becomes your paint. Mulling, I don't know what that word means. What it is just grinding it even finer than using a mortar and pestle to do it. And I don't actually know what the origin of the word is or what it means for sure.
What's that tool that you have? That pretty
This is the muller.
That's a muller?
Yeah, and so this is a flat, it's very much like the pestle, except it's flat.
Stone grinder.
So
yeah, do you know, Leonard, what was you can teach me something. What was that?
well, in German, a Muller is a miller.
Okay, okay. So maybe that's the origin of the word. Yeah. Yeah. This is a cool looking thing. And it's abraded on the bottom and the glass, if you can see, it's frosted. I took and abraded it. You're supposed to, so there's a bit of a roughness to the surface. You can sort of see the frostiness on the glass there. So once this is all done, then you're ready to make your paint. And I've got some that I've really ground in the mortar and pestle. I'm not going to do very much of it here. Better do more than that. And you add, so this would be the pigment. And then the next thing, remember I gave you that recipe with all these other ingredients that is the vehicle with the gum arabic in it. I keep this in the fridge, but it also smells wonderful with that clove oil. So it's nice to have in the fridge. And then it's just a question of adding it.
So is that everything mixed together?
This is everything mixed together. So all this includes the honey, the gum arabic, the clove oil, the plasticizer, the glycerol. If you wanted to put oxcal in, that'd go in there too. Or a brightener. Or the brightener, I think you might actually put in there. I haven't used a brightener. I've never tried it.
What's the shelf life on that, Brad?
I don't know. I think it would last a long time if you keep it in the fridge. It's got that clove oil in to preserve it.
Honey doesn't go bad.
Honey stays forever, right?
The other stuff doesn't sound like it would go bad.
I don't think it would. No. You can buy this too. You don't have to make it. People sell it. People use it in painting. Not with all the other stuff in it, but gum arabic. You can, people use it, add it to their watercolors sometimes too. So then it's just a question of adding it. So it's a little bit hydrophobic, a little sticky.
Because of the honey?
The honey and the glycerol. And then there's this maddening process, and I didn't bring my earplugs. I should have. If you love the smell of fingernails on chalkboard, you're going to love the next hour. They actually say to do this for about an hour. Yeah. And when you mull it, what you do is you break down the particles and it changes the color. So if you get in and read about this, you'll find out that larger particles may have different color, actually. They may reflect color differently than smaller particles. Also, they'll float on top. You can lift it off of the paper easier than you can with a finer particle. So about an hour's worth of this. And it dries out, so you need to keep adding. I'm going to put just a bit more of that in there.
So you're adding more of the pigment.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, it's about a 50-50 ratio volume to start out with. Yes, but that's for the paint. So like in the, yeah, in the tube, wherever that went. Yeah, in the tube, it's only about 10 to 20% pigment.
Oh, okay.
And the rest,
What you're doing is 50%.
yeah, what I'm doing right here, it's about half soil and half,
Okay.
yeah. So I'm not going to do this all night, but just give you a feel for what this is like, and you can see that it's quieting down and getting finer and finer the more I do it. This is still really coarse, really sandy.
So how much have you painted with your custom pigments?
Very little, very little. I haven't dared to do it. First of all, I have very many colors. I don't have enough variety to do many paintings with, although I could, this ochre is a really nice ochre. And I haven't been doing this very long. So I wanted to test the light fastness, first, and other things. So I haven't really used it very extensively. But I'm going to start. I'm going to start using it in some of the paintings. So anyway, let me not do this whole thing because it's just going to take a lot of time, and it's the same old, same old. So this is starting to make, if you want to come down and look at this, even play with it. I've got a brush and some water here. This is starting to make a nice yellow paint now, a nice ochre colored paint.
Would you take a brush and put it on some paper so we can see
Yeah,
what it looks like?
yeah, I can do it. I'll paint with it, and
Well, you just a couple of strokes, Fred, just so you can see. Please.
I can do it in here. This is the same color that I made. I'll do both. As this dries, as you mull it and dry, it dries out. You keep adding more of the vehicle. That's really thick. That's really still more like sand than anything else. But it handles like this one. This is going to handle much more like you're used to. Get in and you can get it out of here really easily.
So does it like stay soft, or does it get hard even in a container? Like the watercolor paints that are in a tube are soft
Yeah.
until you put it out to dry. So does that stay soft or does it dry out?
No, it dries out, just like the one that I passed around. So this is just, you could put this in your palette, just like you'd squeeze it out of a tube. And it gets hard, but it'll rehydrate pretty easily.
Because the honey's in it, it rehydrates faster, but they still do.
Yeah. There, now that's one that painted fairly nicely. It works like a
watercolor.
just like a watercolor. It is a watercolor. I mean, it's just made in the old-fashioned way rather than using modern synthetic. It's very much a watercolor.
Fred, how did the masters, what did they do different to make it into oil paint?
The vehicle was different, so
It's the additives.
it's the oil that they put in. So they put in, instead of gum arabic, they used oil. Linseed oil, I think, is what they used.
I would say linseed, and then I know there's some other stuff too, but I think it's linseed oil.
Yeah, egg tempera, you use egg yolk.
Yes.
Okay, so acrylic, you'd use acrylic, whatever the plastic, whatever they put in acrylic. So the pigments can be the same, but the vehicle is going to be different. Okay, this is a comparison that I did. And again, I'll hold it up so you can see it. But I've got, this is the paint I just made, Utah paint. This is a raw sienna from Winsor & Newton. I actually prefer this one. It's not as bright as the Winsor & Newton one, but I like the Utah color. This is burnt sienna from Winsor & Newton. And then this is the paint made from that red soil that I just passed around.
That one's really pretty.
It's a pretty, yeah, that's really close to a burnt sienna. That's, yeah, it's just from our hillside down by Capitol Reef, actually, is where I got it. And this will lift. I mean, if you want to lift it off, probably be sorry I did this, but let me do that. Doesn't stain the paper, and that'd be nice to have. I just lifted it off. Both of them like that. So that's all I've got to say. If you have questions, like I say, I went through it really quickly. It's kind of fun to do, but it's also kind of a pain in the neck to do. So I don't know how much. They say that people that start out making their own pigments don't last very long, that they go back to buying it pretty fast. So we'll see how long it lasts. So we'll see you do it.
A better appreciation and definitely to know what to look for, like as far as like pigments. So like if you like the honey in it and the fast hydration of it, there are synthetic ones that carry that. And then there's, the ones like Daniel Smith doesn't have honey in it. And I can't remember the name of the one that does. Does Sweet have honey in it?
Has honey in his, any of his paints have honey in them.
And there's another brand that has honey in them.
Graham
Jim Graham
have
does.
honey.
And so there's another one. Anyway, and I watched them like, all they have to do is touch their brush to it and they can get paint off instead of having to let it soak for a second. So that is a really nice benefit of that.
Yeah, it is. And
Yes, they do dry, but all you have to do is touch it with a wet brush and it comes off. You don't have to like scrub it or let it sit. So, and I would like to smell paint that smells like that all the time. That'd be great.
Doesn't that smell nice? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know whether, I use Winsor & Newton colors most of the time, and they totally do it synthetically now, except for those two colors that I found that I passed around. I don't know whether Holbein or Daniel Smith or any of the others still go back and use, these natural pigments or not. I don't know that any of them do it anymore.
I listened to a guy who talked about making color, and he said that a lot of them have had to go to synthetics because of the lack of ability to get the pigments anymore. So like the rock that's in, what is it? The one that they used to make glue out of, it's only found in one location, and it's a hostile location.
Yeah, lapis lazuli is Afghanistan. Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
get that is, I mean, they've got to do something different than that. So
Yeah.
this is awesome.
Yeah, you can't go to Afghanistan and get that. But the azurite we have here in Utah,
Yeah, we do.
we can get a blue out of that, or Dyer's woad if we're stable, you'd have a color. So
I wonder if there's something you could put in it to stabilize it.
I read an article. There are some people claim to be able to use, people in France apparently claim to be able to use Dyer's wood and have a stable pigment. Well, I don't know how they do it. I don't. But they claim to be able to do it.
When you process it down from a quart jar, my son has done it a time, you end up with just a little skim of the indigo tint at the very bottom, and then you can get rid of all the gunk, and then all you have is that blue.
Does it? Do you know if it fades over time?
Well, I don't think it would fade. Germany got famous for making blue dye out of it. During the Middle
Used to be used all the time. Yeah. Indigo too is another plant-based thing.
Yeah.
For how they stabilize. Of course, it fades. Blue jeans fade too. So put it in a painting. How long would it last? Maybe not. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, but you're not washing your paint.
No, you're not. No.
Fade as fast as we fade.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting little journey, a side journey. We'll see where it goes, whether I'll continue it or not. I hope it was interesting to you. It's different than painting a picture. Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned the seraphim motivated you. The
Yeah.
girl with the pearl earring, with Colin Firth,
Yeah.
is another one where they really, because it's Vandermeer, and they're just showing what he has to do to create his paints.
Girl with the pearl earring.
It's a good
Oh.
movie.
Oh, I'll look it up. I'd love to see that.
Having to find it,
Yeah, I'd love to see that. Yeah. In fact, I'll write it down so I don't forget by the time I go home.
It's a good one.
Yeah, so there's some really cool soil down by Roosevelt that's kind of a coppery color or a green oxide.
Well, I gathered, this is something I didn't tell, but I gathered some down by Torrey. I gathered some kind of greenish clay soil. And then I'd read that's where uranium ore is. And so my wife had access to a Geiger counter where she works. And so I had said, bring that thing home. So she tested it, and sure enough, it wasn't really radioactive, but it was just a little bit above background. And then I tested my pants, and so I now have a pair of pants that's got a radioactive knee. Well, I kept the pants. I threw the soil away. But yeah, I forgot that happened, actually.
There's the same color soil stuff that's down more by Richmond. Don't go to
Yeah, if there's someplace else, we'll get some green. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we were down to, Capital, yeah, what's the? I was trying to figure out what you were talking, what's the event? Oh, when we go down to paint. Oh, anyway, when we go down to paint, sometimes,
Art in the park or,
yeah,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we went by the place where they have the mines and they have like the things number, and then there's a sign up there that says you should not be located around this area for longer than like a 24-hour period of time.
Yeah, well, that's where I got some soil down, and not in the park. You can't get it in the park, but around there, yeah. Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Could you leave that out for a minute and let us come up and take a picture?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, come on, play with it if you want. I've got some watercolor paper if you want to try it.
Thanks, Brad. This is
Yep.
awesome.
Great. I'm glad it was useful. Yeah.